So welcome to tonight's Dharma talk. It's about waking up. So the aim of all Buddhist practices is waking up. Actually, the term Buddha, the root of that means, the root of the word Buddha is Bud, which means to understand or to wake up. A Buddha is one who is awakened. So, but what is waking up and how do we wake up? That's the big question, and that's the big project, really. So in a research paper by Steve Taylor, who's a research practitioner psychologist, he defined awakening experiences as temporary expansion and intensification of awareness in which our state of being, our vision of the world, and our relationship to it are transformed, bringing a sense of clarity, revelation, and well-being. We perceive a sense of harmony and meaning and transcend our normal sense of separateness from the world, experiencing a sense of connection and even unity. And throughout this paper, and actually he's written a book, and it's quite good. I haven't read the book, but I've read bits of it. And I've listened to a couple of talks of his. It's really quite good. But he goes on to say in his research, and he did this enormous research on people who have had awakening experiences. The changes in people's lives with these awakening experiences can range from minimal, such as, a shift, a seeing of a pattern in life that's not working very well, and rather than doing what we always done, we do something different, like we see it, and then we make the intention to do something different. That kind of minimal shift to complete transformation. Those who experience awakening experiences report a shift in values, perspectives, and relationships from being less egocentric to more altruistic. They also report increased compassion and, at a transformational level, a dissolution of a previously limiting self-system, otherwise known as the ego. So in his paper, and he's got, I think he's got a few research papers, and I just read one of them. Taylor writes about his research into what triggers awakening experiences. And the most frequent trigger, or the most frequent stimulant, I guess you could say, is psychological turmoil. That's really interesting. Other triggers for awakening include being in nature, creative activities like being in the flow, maybe playing music or creating something, taking psychoactive substances, and I would say most likely psychedelics. No particular triggers, and it happens spontaneously. And spiritual practices. Spiritual practices is right down the bottom as the most frequent trigger. But don't despair. I remember once hearing Joseph Goldstein say that if awakening experience was spontaneous or by accident, then meditation makes us more of this type of accident prone. It kind of makes us more accident prone. When you start to meditate, you start to see the psychological turmoil in your life, and you start to work with it. And I think this thing about psychological turmoil, it's like, and he talked to a lot of people, people who had been in war, people who have been veterans, people who have had near-death experiences, a whole range of different, very difficult experiences. And it's interesting because, in my view, that the dukkha of those experiences give them two options. They can carry on doing what they normally do and feed into the suffering, or they're forced, they're cornered almost, or we're cornered almost, to find a way of resolving this, find a way of moving beyond it, transcending it, so to speak. So that way of doing things is aligned with the Buddhist Four Noble Truths. And if you can remember, the Four Noble Truths, we've been talking about that through these Four Noble Truths throughout this retreat. We have the reality of dukkha, or unsatisfactoriness, or which has a broad spectrum of experiences, ranging from dukkha at this end of the spectrum, which is the difficulties associated with aging, sickness, and death, right down to the subtle and minor dissatisfaction we might have in life. Like I usually say this, and I'm going to say it especially in Byron Bay, like getting your soy chai latte down at Watergoes Beach, just not quite the right temperature. There's a subtle dissatisfaction. So dukkha contains all of that. So this is the first truth, and everything in between. It's like I'm sure you can find dukkha in most every sort of experience. I mean, if you haven't experienced it, I assure you that unless you're perfectly enlightened, you'll be experiencing it. So with the Four Noble Truths, again, what we have is the first Noble Truth, unsatisfactoriness, and what the Buddha encourages us to do, it's almost like a task. I mean, you could think about it like a task, but or a way of relating to this is to understand dukkha. In other words, turn towards it so we see it and we understand it. And this is what happens with psychological turmoil or these extreme experiences. We've got no escape. We have to look at it. There's no way out other than through it, if that makes sense. So, and then the second noble truth, of course, or the second ennobling truth, I'm going to distinguish between noble and ennobling if I haven't already done so on this retreat. The second truth is about realizing the origins of suffering, or realizing the origins of dukkha. And it's not in the external circumstances, because we can have a range of external circumstances. People have a range of external circumstances, and they can suffer in variable ways. But it's about how we relate to those circumstances. And if we relate with greed, ignorance, and hatred, or obsessive craving, or all the ways that are indicated with the hindrances, for example, and the fetters, which I haven't gone through yet, but these things that hold us back, then we will experience dukkha. And the task of the second truth is to release the causes, to let them go. And when we do that, these are all in sequence. When we do that, we realize freedom to the extent that we can let go of a particular pattern. To that extent, we can experience freedom. And I've heard Ajahn Chah say, let go a little, experience a little freedom. I haven't heard him say it literally. I didn't meet Ajahn Chah, but I've read it, that he said this. Let go a little, experience a little bit of freedom. Let go some more, experience more freedom. Let go completely, experience complete freedom. So this is that third truth, the realization of the way things actually are. The realization of breaking through our mental constructions of the world and ourselves to see things as they actually are. So, and then the fourth truth, and the task of that one, by the way, is to realize it, is to live it, is to, I could say, recognize it. Recognize this. And that leads on to us living the path. I know it sounds a bit ironic, the fourth truth is down at the end, but it's kind of, when you can see these sequences, it kind of makes sense. So the fourth truth is to live it, to practice it, and that is the Eightfold Path. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And this, or right samadhi. And this is like these practices, these factors on the path are like 8 spokes on a wheel, and they're all important if the wheel is to stay balanced and roll evenly towards awakening, if that makes sense. They're compared to a wheel. One time I've heard that dukkha's been discussed as a wobbly wheel. One way it's like, you know how a wobbly wheel is kind of, the word cup means wheel, I think. The syllable cup means wheel, I think. And duk means something wrong, so it's a wrong wheel. It's a wobbly wheel. It's not quite moving correctly. So we have this term dukkha, and if we take out one of the spokes, it's going to be wobbly. So they're all there equally balancing each other and providing support for one another, and they're all equally important. And so this, as you know, we've been talking about how these 4 truths, they're symbolically represented by a lotus growing out, a beautiful lotus growing out of the slime and sludge and horrible experiences at the bottom of the pond. And the late Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "No mud, no lotus." So this means that when we have difficult experiences, we can have an opportunity. And I was thinking, maybe that's where I got this term opportunity. We're talking about the window of opportunity when we work with that range in our wage in our reactions to, say, difficult experiences. If you're not like 80 to 90% or 100% confident that you can work through it, you could risk re-traumatizing yourself or feeding into the trauma. So we talk about that, and psychologists talk about that as the window of tolerance, and the other day I talked about it as the window of opportunity. So I think that's all right. So the opportunities and the challenges are to find inner resources and insights which help us cope with and bear that which is difficult to bear. Another way dukkha has been described as that which is difficult to bear. I remember listening to some Dharma talks years ago from, I think it was with Achan Mahabua, and he was speaking Thai, and I could understand a little bit of Thai then, I can still understand a little bit of Thai now. And it's like, dukkha is when you can't stand it anymore. It's like, it's just difficult, and you're forced to find freedom. So by courageously and compassionately, and I emphasize compassionately, because the Eightfold Path includes those right intentions, and they're intentions of goodwill, which include warm benevolence and compassion, intentions of letting go, which is kind of release. It's actually called renunciation in the sutras, but I think of renunciation of giving up one pleasure for one gross pleasure for a more subtle pleasure, like the subtle pleasure and happiness of liberation, for example. And the other intentional right intention is harmlessness, which you could interpret as compassion. So when we can lean into the difficulty at the right time with psychological resources, we begin to develop insights that are liberating. And these inner resources then enable us to thrive in the face of dukkha. All schools of Buddhism, and there's many different schools of Buddhism, all schools of Buddhism use the Four Noble Truths as their basic framework. And they all aim to waking up to the reality of Nibbana. That's Pali, Nibbana, it's called Nibbana in Pali, or Nirvana in Sanskrit. Nibbana and I'll be using the term Nibbana. Nibbana is unconditioned. It's the reality of non-clinging and psychological freedom, and it is the goal of all Buddhist practices, as I've mentioned. Nibbana is not a thing to be achieved. Rather, it is a realization that cannot be explained by using conceptual language or other worldly conventions. As unconditioned, it's not subject to causes and conditions. Therefore, it's not impermanent. It doesn't arise and it doesn't change. Sometimes it's called the deathless. And I mentioned the deathless this morning in the 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing. Right at the end there, I was talking about cessation, and I started listening to myself go through what's called the 12 links of dependent arising. I don't know if any of you know those 12 links or not, and I started saying to myself, maybe this is way beyond people's understanding. Maybe I'm just speaking words and it's kind of gobbledygook. But I thought, maybe someone will get this. Maybe there's just one person on the edge of awakening out there, or maybe they'll listen to a recording of it and they'll get it. They'll wake up. So I went through that. So it is not something to be achieved by conventional language, and it's not explained by conventional language or worldly conventions. It is sometimes called the deathless, and this means the deathless, what we mean by the deathless, is that there's no arising, therefore there's no passing away. It is the deathless. When the Buddha was enlightened, he just hung out for a while, enjoying the bliss of awakening, where he, under the Bodhi trees, and he moved around to a couple of trees where he was. And then eventually he was motivated to seek out 5 ascetics who were practicing with him, because he realized that they had little dust in their eyes, they had the capacity to see this. So on the way, he was met by a wanderer, and the wanderer was really impressed by his countenance and like he was light, and he said, "What are you?" And he said, "I'm a Buddha. I'm awakened in my own means. I'm a Samma Sambuddha. Like I'm an awakened being. I'm a Buddha. And I'm beating the drum of the deathless." And this wanderer looked at him and said, "Oh, okay, good on you, mate. See you later. All the best." And he just kind of wandered off. I mean, he didn't quite say it like that. I can't remember the exact words as they're described in the sutras, but it's kind of like that. Oh, well, okay. And it was like, at that point, the Buddha realized, I've got to have a different way of explaining this. And so by the time he got to the 5 ascetics, he thought he would take on a particular formula that was used in traditional medicine of the time. And this formula goes something like, there is an illness, there's a cause for the illness, there's an illness, the illness's etiology, there's a cause for it, there's a reason why it's arising, and it's possible to be healed from the illness, and there's medicine to heal you. So he took on that framework, which is very, very practical, and people got it. Okay, so I'm giving you an idea of where the deathless comes from. And to realize this deathless, actually there's various stages of awakening, and you can realize the deathless, but you're not fully awake. It requires 4, in Theravada Buddhism anyway, it requires 4 awakening experiences to wake up completely. But I won't go down that tangent right now. So what it's like to realize it frees us from being bound by egocentricity. The egocentricity of me, I, and myself. The constructions of, and all the suffering involved with this identification. It's like waking up from a dream, and where we were believing to be true, the delusional mental constructions about the world and ourselves, to see the reality of how things actually are. And I mentioned this in another talk I gave, and I was reflecting on it. And you know, some of you may not be old enough to remember these little, I can't remember what they're called, but they were 3D images. And you get these books and you open up this image, it's just this scattering of nothing. I mean, you couldn't really see anything. And, but if you could shift your focus, suddenly something would appear, like a 3D image, and go, wow, look, that's a dragon, or wow, that's a butterfly. Oh, what a beautiful image. But you had to, you know, you give it to someone else and they go, what's this about? And it's like you had to really kind of train your perceptions to have a shift in the focus so you could see this thing. And I think it's a waking up is sort of like that. It's like we're living it, it's here, and we just can't, we're sort of so focused on our ego constructions, and we're so caught up in the world that we think is real out there, but it's actually in fact our creations. I mean, that's not denying the fact that there is Ukraine and there is America and there's a lot of really shitty things happening in the world right now. But it's providing a perspective of the reality of the way things are. It's providing a perspective on what I would call, say, an absolute reality, and it's not denying a relative reality, if that makes sense. You know, the reality of, you know, paying the taxes and getting up every day and having breakfast and having children and families and relating to everyone. And the thing about waking up, I reckon, this is just my opinion, it's like when we wake up, even if it's just stages of awakening, there's a shift from the world being centered around me, I, and myself, like it's, you know, this is my universe, to a broader perspective of the world sort of being out there, like we have a sense of what it's like to be connected with others. And this broader perspective. And what we do with that is that we act and behave and do what we normally do, but without forgetting the reality of the situation. But we do what we normally do with the principles of that reality. We do what we normally do, sorry, we don't do what we normally do, we do what we do following the principles of the Eightfold Path. Like we're living according to the reality of that Eightfold Path. So we're living ethically. We're living in a way we're not harming anybody. And when, you know, say if we were, you know, we got married and when we were in deluded states, and then we wake up, we still love our partners. We still care for them. And, you know, we look after them. And we love our grandchildren and children and all the rest of it. It's still, we're doing the best we can. So I hope I can convey that kind of reality and way we can combine this absolute reality with relative reality. It's not like shutting off the world and saying, oh, it's all an illusion. That's not it. It's a recognition that there is another, there is an absolute, there is a relative reality. And we're motivated by not harming. We're motivated by recognizing that we're all connected. And we do no harm. We try to do no harm anyway. So, the type of a profound awakening where there is a direct realization of Nibbana, I would call noble awakening. There are, however, also ennobling awakenings. Ennobling awakenings may not involve the realization of Nibbana, but be on the path to this realization. And in my view, ennobling awakenings could also involve significant realizations that could be called therapeutic. Look, we come on a retreat. I've been talking to you guys. I think I've talked with everyone. There's little awakenings you're having. You know, you're having, and sometimes significant awakenings, but there's kind of awakenings nonetheless. Like you're waking up to various patterns and, you know, tendencies, and you're making a decision to do something different. I think they're called ennobling awakenings. And when we talk about waking up, we can include them, if that makes sense. So, though awakening is the aim of all Buddhist traditions and practices, there are differences between the traditions and how they structure and describe awakening experiences, as well as the practices that lead to them. And I was going to leave out this little academic bit, but I thought, no, that's kind of interesting. People might find it interesting, so I'll include it, especially those people who know a little bit about the various different practices within Buddhism. So during an online retreat I did with Analio and also Chan Master Venerable Gyalgo, who is a Chan Master. Venerable Gyalgo spoke about 3 stages of development with Buddhism. The first he called the path of abandonment. The second he called the path of transformation. And the third was the path of recognition. So the path of abandonment, which is kind of more related to the practices as found in early Buddhism, and there were a number of schools in early Buddhism, and Theravadan is the one that's most closely related to early Buddhism as far as I understand. So in early Buddhism, and in those practices, such as what we're doing here, there's an emphasis on abandoning and letting go of the tendencies of greed, ignorance and hatred. Therefore, when there's no cause for suffering, such as maintaining craving, there is also no dukkha, and nibbana is realized by letting go. So this is the path of abandonment, letting go. In my view, there's a tendency in early Buddhism, in this path of abandonment, to focus on one of those links, a really, really powerful link in that cycle of suffering, that's called craving. And in fact, when the Buddha went and spoke to these, he gave his Dharma talk to the 5 ascetics, who initially shunned him, and they said, "Oh no, this guy's gone down the path of hedonism, and let's not even notice him." But they couldn't help it. He walked up to them and pulled a seat up and gave him some water. And when they say pulled a seat up, they made a seat ready. I mean, there was probably a rock somewhere, and he sat on that. And at first they said, "We don't want to hear what you're talking about. We don't believe you." And the Buddha said, "In all the time you've known me, have I ever told you a mistruth? Have I ever, told you something wrong that wasn't true for me?" And they said, No. So he said, "Listen to me." And he expounded the 4 Noble Truths. He also talked about the middle way, the Noble Eightfold Path. And when it came to the cause of dukkha, he said craving is the cause of dukkha. In Pali it's called tanha, and it literally means thirst. Craving is the cause of dukkha. So a lot of the early Buddhist approach is about very much focusing on craving, clinging and grasping, those links in the cycles of suffering. The path of transformation involves energetically embracing the parts of ourselves that we struggle with and transforming them to liberation. And I'd say the practices found in Tibetan Mahayana Buddhism or Vajrayana Buddhism practices, as an example, and with Vajrayana they might do some practices such as Tantra, or becoming one with enlightenment qualities such as compassion and wisdom, are examples of this. So it's like we become one with a particular quality, like a deity, like Lisa's been talking about Green Tara, Om Tare Ture Ture Soha, Om Tare Ture Ture Soha. Yeah. Tare, yeah, that's right. Anyway, that's a practice where we like the compassionate friend meditation. It's like we imagine that that deity is there holding our hand or radiating wisdom and compassion to us, and we take it in, and eventually we bring that green Tara to rest in our heart. And from there we radiate compassion out. So it's like the three flows. It's other to self, self to self, and then self to other. And so this is what I think Gyalgo was talking about. Venerable Gyalgo was talking about when he's talking about the path of transformation. And the path of recognition involves what Mahayana Buddhists say is already here, the Absolute, or our Buddha nature. Rather than abandoning the causes of suffering, which is the focus on with Theravadan Buddhism or early Buddhism, the process is sometimes described as pulling aside the veils of delusion to realize what is already here, our Buddha nature. And you can understand that if Nibbana doesn't arise and doesn't pass away, it's kind of here already. And what's happening is we're just not quite seeing it, Our level of focus is not quite right. We're just not seeing that beautiful 3D image in our picture. And these paths may include, for those who understand these, may include Mahamudra from Tibetan Buddhism, the practice of silent illumination from Chan Buddhism, and Shikantaza from Japanese Zen Buddhism. And these approaches, in my view, tend to focus more on uprooting delusion and ignorance. And if you're listening and maybe even remembering what I was saying this morning, and it wasn't just a jumble of words, hopefully, I mentioned, when ignorance ceases, then everything else ceases. When ignorance ceases, sankhara ceases. When sankhara ceases, consciousness ceases. Sankhara means creations, mental creations. When when consciousness ceases, so does six sense fear. Six sense fear, sight, sound, smell, touch, taste. And when that ceases, so does contact, so does Vedana or feeling, and so does craving. But it originates here with ignorance, if that makes sense. So when we might be meditating away and there's a shift in our perspective and we'll go, wow, there it is. You see the way things actually are. There's a shift. And then what happens is we're uprooting ignorance. So personally, I appreciate all these ways of practicing, and they all lead to the same place, as far as I'm concerned. They all lead to waking up. And again, I'm describing my views of waking up. Somebody else might come along and talk about something completely different, which is meaningful for them. So from the early Theravadan Buddhist perspective, we can say the path is about cultivating the wholesome and releasing the unwholesome. And the wholesome is that which aligns with the paths of ethics, ethics, meditation, and wisdom, or the Eightfold Path. And in the unwholesome is that which blocks the path, and that which further entangles us in these cycles of suffering. So in Pali, the unwholesome is referred to as kilesa. It's a great word. I mean, all these Pali words are really great. Now, I know I say a few Pali words, but I always explain them, and I just like using them because they're so full of meaning, So kilesa literally translates as to distort. And so what happens is these kilesa are also known as mental distortions, also known as mental defilements, because they somehow maybe defile purity of the clarity of our mind, the purity of our mind. I don't tend to use that one so much because it doesn't ring a bell with me and doesn't sit nicely, but it's still the way it's used. They're also called the corruptions, and they all cloud the mind. And they include all the tendencies and states of mind that arise from the three root causes of suffering: greed, ignorance, and hatred. This includes the 5 hindrances, wrong views. I mentioned wrong views, like not seeing things in clearly. The conceit I am, I think I mentioned the conceit I am, that tendency to take on personally our self-concepts as me, I, and myself, and cling to them. I remember this morning I invited you to let go of, actually I was inviting you to let go of the conceit I am, which is something that is actually completely released with full awakening, but to the extent that we can let go of a little bit of these constructed stories of a self, this ego self, and the world revolving around this ego self, to the extent that we can just let go of it, even just a few moments, those moments are free, they're liberating. And that's what I was talking about when I was inviting you to liberate your mind, liberating the mind, that which is the 12th step? Yeah, I think it's the 12th step. And there's a few other very strong defilements. One is called shamelessness, and this is where we have no shame for really going against social propriety or going against accepted ethical principles. Like we just blatantly go out and be unethical. There's no kind of, remember that saying, have you no shame? It's meant in that respect. And I just want to reiterate, I just want to emphasize that there's toxic shame and healthy shame. When I hear Achan Jayasaro talk about it, he talks about it as wise shame. And what we're talking about here is wise shame. Shamelessness means people go out and do things that are unethical and they have no kind of moral principles about restraining from that. So this is an unwholesome tendency. It's called a kilesa. And there are many strategies to work with the kilesa. So the way we work with the kilesa is by reducing their impact and also, if we can, uprooting them. So sometimes working with this practice is, cultivating the wholesome and letting go or releasing the unwholesome has been compared to gardening and having a particular garden where we're trying to grow some vegetables or flowers or something. And what we do is we nourish the flowers, we add fertilizer and we allow it to have sun and we water it. And also we go through uprooting the weeds, or we de-nourish them. We nourish the flowers and we de-nourish the weeds, and it's like that. It's like having our own garden of the mind. So sometimes we focus directly on the mental distortions in order to uproot them. And this begins by becoming aware of them and then making the decision to de-nourish them or weed them out. In my experience, a good opportunity to become aware of our mental defilements and demolish any conceited ideas about how enlightened we may be is by travelling and staying in austere Thai forest monasteries, like I did in October and November of this year. In these places, we can't distract ourselves or avoid contact with our defilements as they arise. And it's a great time to come face to face with the dukkha of them, understand them, and release them. So, as I just mentioned, from late September, I went to Thailand in late September, and I stayed there for a total of 7 weeks. And I did a lot of really wonderful things. I hung out with my my middle son and his children and his partner went there for, they're still there at the moment. They went there for 3 months in total, and I hung out with them for a week every now and then, a week one time and then a couple of days the other time. The rest of the time I spent in monasteries, and all up I visited 4 monasteries, and I stayed there for quite some time. One monastery I visited was run by an Australian monastic who ordained around the time I was a monk, and we actually knew each other then, which is really lovely to meet him. He's the abbot of a temple called Wat Ratanawan. And this temple only has about 10 monks at the time, 10 monastics there, and there's a number of lay practitioners. There was some women across the road in another whole section, and in our section, those monks, a couple of them were Westerners, like one from Canada, one from Russia, and also there was some. One from, where was he from? One from Germany and one from America, the United States. There was also a couple of what we call pakaus or anagarikas. Anagarikas wear white clothes, white t-shirt or shirt and white pants, and they're practicing and staying there with the aim to become monastics. So there was one Russian and there was one Canadian pakau there. There was another pakau who was, or anagarika, who was from Thailand. So when I was staying there, the abbot, Venerable Nyai Damo, would have a talk regularly with these, with the Westerners. He would have a separate talk with the monastics at some times, and would have Dharma talks in Thai and English, so we can understand both those, the English people who couldn't speak Thai, the English-speaking people who couldn't speak Thai could understand the Dharma talks. And he'd also have a little kind of get-together with the bakaus and the lay practitioners there. And one day he said, there are 3 words that are Thai words that are useful for you to learn. And these Thai words were otton, otton. The next word was patipat. And the next word was turaman. And it doesn't look like anybody understands Thai here, so I'll explain the meaning of those words. Otton literally translates as endurance or tolerance. And I remember when he said these 3 words are very useful to understand if you're going to become a monastic. And I would say if you're interested in the practice, and also, they're very useful words to understand in life in general, both lay and monastic. So otton translates as tolerance or endurance. And I remember when I was a monk, I experienced a lot of discomfort and like sitting on the floor a lot, sore back, and also, as I explained the other day, getting malaria and hepatitis A, and it was quite difficult. Sometimes I get very hungry, we ate 1 meal a day, and so on and so forth. So it was very important, I thought, to learn to endure. I can see the benefit of it, because if you can endure it, hang in there with it, you can see how it all changes. And I mentioned that I've listened to some talks by Ajahn Jayasaro, who's another monastic in Thailand. I met him when I was there, and his Thai is fantastic. And the first Thai word he learned was otton. And he learnt that from listening to Luang Por Chah, who's one of the famous teachers there. So otton is also known as patience. We can also consider it as patience, where, and it's a different angle on patience. Sometimes we understand patience as forbearance, but this understanding of patience, a different way of understanding patience, is as it's translated into Pali as khanti. A different way of understanding khanti is by coming to the present moment. Like we're living from the present moment rather than living with craving for something in the future or something to get rid of something from the past or even get rid of something right now. We're living in a sense of being completely present with the way things are, and we're having a contentment and being present. So this is sort of another angle on this. So it's very helpful to develop patience. The other word, patipat. The patipat translates as practice. And it not only means formal meditation practice, but it also means living the Eightfold Path. And you can see how this is very important. And when I did stay in Thailand, when I lived in Thailand with a great Achan, I didn't learn much about meditation actually, but I learned a lot about practice. I learned a lot about work. I learned a lot about doing every activity in a way where you're completely present and you're respectful, and one is into the whole experience of the Eightfold Path. And I must say that those lessons I learnt with my teacher in Thailand, I brought through with me. I can see the value of everyday experience, even going to work and being a psychologist, going to work, having a family, all the rest of it. There's something really valuable about committing to this Eightfold Path and practice. So that's the second word. And the third word, the meaning of the word turaman, means to torture. This one could sound a bit strange, but I'll give you the brief overview of this. It really means giving the kilesa or the mental distortions a hard time, by not nourishing or reinforcing them. And when I mentioned this to my partner, that I said I was going to, say a little bit of something about turaman, she said, "That's wrong, Malcolm. That's wrong. You shouldn't mention torture in a Buddhist sense. It's not about torture." And I said, I understand what you're saying. But I also understand that in Asian culture, the practice is a little bit different. I mean, in the West, we tend to be hard on ourselves, and we tend to, when we start to practice, we're kind of gung-ho. We're type A personalities, for example, and we really get into it. So it's torturous enough as it is, not by adding any more torture. But in the East, in cultures where there's kind of a lot of laid-backness, the teachers will see this, and they will sometimes compare this practice about going to war. Like you go to war with the defilements. The defilements are the enemy, and you battle with them. So there's this kind of language around going to war. So coming to Turaman, it's really about not reinforcing the kilesa. So look, in my journeys to Thailand a few months ago, I went to one temple. I stayed there for 10 days. I went to Ratanawan, which is a delightful stay with the Australian abbot. And I also went on to the temple I used to live on the hill. The temple's called Wat Doi Dhamma Jedi. And I wrote letters, and I had these letters. I wrote these letters in English, and I had them translated into Thai through AI, and I can still read a little bit of Thai, so I read that they were okay. And I eventually sent them, and I got an email from someone who could speak English at the temple. And he said, I asked him for permission to go and stay there for a while. And he said, yeah. He was saying what the abbot said. He said, yes, you can come and stay, but you need to adhere to the 8 precepts, meaning you need to have 1 meal a day, like we do. And also, you adhere to the practice, what we do in this temple, the protocols and the practice. And I said, of course, that's no problem. So, there I go. I go to this temple, and as soon as I get out of the car, I caught a taxi there. Got out of the car, somebody greeted me and they said, "Oh, go and talk to that man over there." There was a lay Thai person. He was a really lovely man. We hung out together. And I picked up a broom. I arrived about 2 p.m. And I know the practice of this temple is to sweep. When I was there 45 years ago, there was about 30 monks in this temple. And since Achan Lungpo Ben has passed away, there's now, Lungpo Ben's the teacher, there's now only 6 monks. So there's a lot of sweeping to do. And one of the practices is sweeping. And I remember back then it was really great to sweep, very wonderful practice, like these big long brooms, here now, very mindful, you get a good exercise. And we used to do it in the afternoons for about an hour and a bit, hour and a half, and then go and have a drink, like a cup of tea or something like that. So I'm there, I pick up the broom, I'm sweeping. And the first hour, this is fantastic, this is great, just like the old days. After about an hour, I got a bit tired. And we didn't stop. I was there, started at 2 p.m. and I didn't stop till about 5:30. I was exhausted. And then, I had to go and wash up and I had to go upstairs to go up into the boat and for chanting. So I'm chanting. And then we meditate and we can retreat back to our rooms about 9 p.m. or 9:30 or something like that. And then we're up at 3 a.m. And then we're meditating, we're chanting and meditating. And then at probably about 5:30, we start to get things ready to go for the monks to go Pindapat. And it's kind of preparing everything around the temple. And, lay people come, so you've got to sweep again. So you're sweeping again. So then you have a meal, and then you do a bit more work, and then you start sweeping again. There's a lot of leaves on that temple. And so I stayed there for 5 days in total. And I think I averaged between about 4 to 7 hours sweeping a day. And it was really, like I said, it's really wonderful the first hour. After that, it gets exhausting. And there I am, I thought I made an agreement that I'd do this practice. And here it was, and the other monks were going, all these young monks, and there's my mind going, what am I doing here? I've travelled all this way to sweep up these leaves, and they come back the next day anyway. And even they come back, the moment you sweep them, if it's windy, you're sweeping the leaves into a little pile so you can shovel them up and put them somewhere else. And the wind's blowing them, you're sweeping, and the wind blows them back, and you're sweeping. And I also got very tired, and I started thinking, oh wow, it'd be really nice to have a lychee juice or something like that, a cool lychee juice. It wasn't too hot there at this time of the year, but maybe I'm just too old to do this now anymore. I can't do that. I really like to sit down, and I just kind of sit in the shade for a bit. And even maybe if I had some Barocca, vitamin B, the fizzy drink, that would give me a bit of energy. And I noticed the complaining mind. And I started to just work with it. I thought, it's so exhausting doing this. But then every now and then I'd just be present with the sweep. Just be present with the sweep. Just this. And I realized the more I kind of entertained the complaining thoughts, the more I entertained the defilements, the stronger they become. And if I could just be present, completely present, there was no defilements, there was no distortions, there was no thinking about, oh shit, what am I doing here? This is crappy. There's none of that, and there's just sweeping. No me, no I, no myself, just presence. And I reflected on why then Luang Por Cha says it's good to turaman the defilements. Turaman the defilements, and forest monasteries are fantastic at that. You get hungry, you get thirsty, you get all sorts of things happening. Like I said, it's a good place to recognize how unenlightened one is, because the defilements are there. So in early Buddhist teachings, the Buddha often used analogies and similes and metaphors to describe the nature of experiences, as elaborate verbal descriptions were often inadequate. This was especially the case with Nibbana, or Nirvana, which he was reported to have said, "This truth is profound, hard to see, hard to understand, peaceful and sublime, unattainable by mere reasoning, subtle and to be experienced by the wise." And according to one translation, and I'm translating the word nirvana here, the word literally means to unbind. So what we do, what Nibbana is doing, is unbinding this cycling in samsara. Samsara is another way of describing cycles of suffering, these patterns of cycling around in suffering. And there's, so here freedom means that one is unbound by patterns and habits that lead to dukkha. And a metaphor that's often used for Nibbana is the extinguishment of a fire. One time the Buddha was asked, where do enlightened beings go when they die? Similar to that other question that I was mentioning the other day. And the Buddha responded not by asking another question. He asked, well, where does the flame go of a candle go when you extinguish it, when you put it out? So in this way, the Buddha evaded discussion about whether Nibbana was a kind of internalism, like lasting forever, one goes for a realm where one lives forever, or one abides forever in Nibbana. And he also evaded this other polarity, which describes, some people talk about Nibbana as obliteration, as annihilism, like annihilating everything so there's a nothing. So he evaded that, and he said something like this. Rather than a nothing, he said, the Buddha was reported to have said that in reference to Nibbana, that there is an unborn, an unbecome, an unmade, unconditioned, and I'm putting brackets around this, the existence of which makes possible escape from the born, the become, the made, the conditioned. And I'll just repeat this. The great Ajahn Chah described Nibbana as the reality of non-clinging. When clinging is the cause of suffering, then letting it go is the cause of freedom. And on that note, we have come to the conclusion of our talks for this retreat. And I would like to say, if Lisa and I have misquoted anyone or misconveyed the teachings in any way, or harmed anyone through what we have spoken and said, we ask for forgiveness. So thank you everyone for your attention, and may we all wake up to the reality of the way things actually are and experience the supreme happiness, security, peace and liberation of Nibbana. Thank you.